one voice, and so they're much more easily targeted. The communities that have these very rich divisions within them in terms of race, culture, language, and so forth. And just very quickly going through some of these new studies that have come out recently, including by the Center for Effective Government and Environmental Justice Health Coalition and so forth. Massachusetts consistently ranks last in terms of the greatest racial and income disparities with regard to who lives near the most dangerous chemical facilities in the country. About 11.4 million people nationwide live near these facilities. They often blow up, and you can see that there are profound racial and class disparities nationwide. But in terms of Massachusetts, we rank last in terms of the highest percentage of people in poverty that live next to these facilities, as well as the highest percentage of elderly living next to the most dangerous chemical facilities. So again, that's an environmental justice dimension. If you look at chemical releases, again, tremendous disparities in terms of communities of color, where it's almost 200,000 pounds of chemical toxins released directly into the air and water and ground by the largest industrial facilities over a 10-year period, in comparison with predominantly white communities. 19,000 pounds is nothing to sneeze at, but again, you see these radical jumps in the total number of industrial emissions that occur in communities of color. And in Massachusetts, even though communities of color only make up 9% of all the communities, they receive over 40% of all the carcinogens that are released by industry in this state. And again, this new report, I'll urge you to look at it, Who's in Danger, looks at race, poverty, and chemical disasters. Massachusetts and Wisconsin rank last in terms of the environmental justice dimensions. And here's about the 12,500 chemical waste facilities that were mapped. I don't have time to get into this, but one thing that's kind of interesting, there was a new survey that was recently done among Latinos, and they found that the 1 in every 3 Latinos in the United States lives in what is considered to be the most overpolluted communities in the United States. And they recently did these polls. They were conducted about 6-7 months ago. And among American Latinos, they found that concern for the pollution of their environment now ranks of greater concern than immigration. 93% of all Latinos consider pollution in their environment to be more important than any other issue that they're dealing with in their communities. And this is the Danvers chemical plant explosion that occurred a few years ago. Had a pretty significant impact on the community there. We know that there's disparities with regard to power plants, and we're winning these victories in power plants in Massachusetts, but 68% of African Americans nationwide live within 30 miles of a coal-fired power plant. So whatever issue you're looking at, whatever the type of hazard, we see that these patterns are increasingly reproducing themselves. The other thing you may not know, a study done out of the University of Minnesota found that racial minorities on average are exposed to 38% higher levels of nitrogen dioxide than whites, and nitrogen dioxide is implicated in a whole host of health problems, including asthma and heart attacks. But look at these are the worst 8 cities with regard to racial disparities, and you see how much the Northeast is represented in this. Boston comes in at number 4, and Bridgeport down in Connecticut comes in at 3, and Providence comes in at number 5. And the findings, they found that these racial disparities with respect to air pollution is worse in the Northeast than any other part of the country. And we often have these reputations. I just came back from an environmental justice meeting in Mexico. Oh, you're from a blue state, it's liberal state, so how bad can the environmental justices be there compared to the Jim Crow South of the Western United States? And what the study after study shows is that some of the worst disparities that exist anywhere in the United States with regard to exposure to environmental hazards, particularly in terms of race, exist right here in Massachusetts. So again, the cumulative environmental burden is over 20 times greater for people of color living in Massachusetts. And in terms of class, again, working class communities are exposed. It's not as powerful as race, but still there are significant class-based disparities. We put together a list, 360-something communities in Massachusetts. This is every community of color, 34 of them. And we looked at what are the worst 30 most polluted, and practically every community of color makes this list of the worst 30. If you live in a community of color, you're 39 times more likely to live in one of the 30 most environmentally overburdened communities in Massachusetts. These are gross disparities that exist here, and are really quite profound. So finally, I guess what I would like to say, and we'll talk about a little bit about this, I think the goal of the environmental justice movement is not to ensure that all people are polluted equally. It's very important that we engage in struggles to protect these communities, but I think one of the things that's very excited about this point in history, and we can talk about this, is the alliances that are beginning to be made in the environmental justice movement with other movements, so that we can find more holistic solutions, so that we can go to the root causes of the ecological crisis. So the struggle isn't just about not in my backyard, but it's about in no one's backyard. And the environmental justice movement has a fundamental role to play in the development of what I call a more transformative environmental politics, where we can start, for example, looking at not just how we're going to contain pollution coming out of the smokestacks, but maybe we can restructure the production process so that toxins aren't produced and the pollution isn't produced in the first place. That means safer alternatives, green chemistry, and renewable energy, and so forth. So I think we're at this point where movements need to come together, because the only way that we can win these transformative changes, which require us to take on the most powerful industries in the world, is if we come together and have the sufficient numbers and power as a mass movement. No single organization or segment of the environmental movement can win those changes on our own. It requires something much bigger than ourselves. Thank you very much.